earth. It can bury the dead.
Anybody who does heroin has had a friend who has died.
Or it can create new life.
This project is about producing good food.
It all depends.
We've been in jail. Screws can't even tell us what to eat.
What you put into it.
Things are going to get hard.
I feel desperately out of my depth.
But if you want it that much, you'll get there.
Monty Don helps a group of heroin addicts bury their addiction. Monty Don, Growing Out of Trouble, starts Thursday at 9 on bbc2.
Schools programmes in BBC Learning Zone from 2, but first on BBC2 we'll hand over to BBC News 24.
And Iraqi people and the next president of the United States will face a slowly but steadily improving situation in Iraq and in the region, or will face the very real risk and possible reality of a regional conflagration.
At least 2 of the senators present are likely to run for president, and many of the others once dreamt of it. But there was remarkably little posturing today. This was a serious conversation about a deadly serious issue.
If Robert Gates thinks that America is not winning in Iraq, then ordinary Americans are going to ask themselves, what are we still doing there? Well, they might get an answer tomorrow from the Iraq Study Group when it publishes its findings. Remember, Robert Gates was a member of that group until recently. He reached many of his conclusions about Iraq while he was working with the group. And, as he believes, all the options are on the table, and that includes what the White House used to call cutting and running. Matt Fry, BBC News, Washington.
I'm joined in Washington now by Charles Kupchan, a former National Security Council official with the Clinton administration and currently Director of Europe Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to BBC News. Just how much of a break with the past is Robert Gates really going to be?
Well, he clearly is going to speak the truth in ways that Rumsfeld perhaps did not in the frank statement today that the United States is not winning. And he also represents a different tradition of centrist internationalism, going back to Father Bush as opposed to George Bush. But there already are some centrists on the inside, Condi Rice, the Secretary of State, being one of them. So I think we can expect there to be a shift in the balance of power within the Bush administration. But any sense that there's going to be a radical shift in strategy is, I think, premature. The President and Vice President are still in control. They're telling us they're not going to be leaving Iraq anytime soon.
But this much-awaited report from the Iraq Study Group due to be delivered on Wednesday to the White House, surely it is going to give the Bush administration some options to get out of Iraq in some way.
Well, I think there's an enormous amount of anticipation here in Washington and the country more broadly because the Iraq Study Group is about to issue its report, because Rumsfeld has been sacked. Yesterday, John Bolton resigned. A few weeks ago, the Democrats took both houses of Congress. So you can sense that there is a change afoot. But I think that the administration itself has been preparing the American people for less change than many might want, because Bush suggests that we're not going to be heading for the exits. If I had to guess, the Bush administration will embrace more of the diplomatic side of the Iraq Study Group. That is to say, get a regional conference, let's engage Syria and Iran. I'm less convinced that they're going to be prepared to head to the exits in Iraq.
And of course, just briefly and finally, giving up the prize, if there is one, of having a base in Iraq, they're never going to do that, are they?
Well, I think under the best of circumstances, even if we see stability in Iraq, it's going to be many years before the United States completely withdraws, and that may give them a foothold in the region that some suspect may have been one of the goals for the invasion to begin with, although I think this was very much about WMD and Saddam Hussein and not about that base. But I think it's safe to say the U.S. is going to be there for quite some time.
Charles Kupchan, many thanks. Fiji's ousted Prime Minister has left the country following a coup. The United States has suspended more than $2.5 million in assistance to Fiji in response. Fiji may also be suspended from the Commonwealth. Military Commander Frank Bainimarama, I beg your pardon, deposed the elected government of Prime Minister Naisenia Ngarase, accusing it of corruption. There have been months of tension between the army and the Prime Minister. Let's go live now to our correspondent Phil Mercer, who's in Fiji. So, Phil, where do we believe the Prime Minister to be?
Well, we believe that he's been taken by the military back to his home village on the island of Lau here in Fiji. We believe that he was flown out of the capital Suva earlier today, and this is really a further strengthening of the military's grip on this country. Of course, Prime Minister or former Prime Minister Laisenia Ngarase ousted from office yesterday. Commodore Frank Bainimarama now making plans to appoint a caretaker Prime Minister. An interim government will then follow, and the Commodore says that democratic elections will follow. He didn't give a date, but one thing is for certain, that Laisenia Ngarase, the ousted elected leader of Fiji, is no longer in the capital, and he's believed to be back in his home district of Lau, which is some considerable distance away.
What's been the public's reaction to this? Obviously, information may be quite limited to them because of media censorship.
Well, it's interesting. I'm at an army checkpoint here in Suva today, and people are going about their daily business as best as they can. It's lunchtime here in Suva, and the streets are pretty busy. It's a pretty warm day, and the soldiers, as they have been for the past few days, have manned these particular types of checkpoints dotted around the city, and there seems to be a reasonably calm air here. But you speak to people, and it's very difficult to find anyone who is supportive of what the military has done. Of course, there will be people in Fiji who believe that Commodore Frank Bainimarama has done the right thing in getting rid of what they would consider to be a corrupt and deceitful government, but certainly speaking to people here in Suva today, most people I've spoken to firmly believe the opposite, that the military has no place whatsoever interfering in internal politics here in Fiji, and that's certainly the view of the international community, especially Fiji's very powerful South Pacific neighbours, Australia and New Zealand.
Phil, thanks very much indeed. Phil Mercer there in Fiji. Italian prosecutors have called for over 30 members of the CIA and Italian Secret Service to be tried for kidnapping an Egyptian cleric in Milan. Prosecutors say the man, Abu Omar, was kidnapped and flown abroad to Egypt, where he was tortured. If a judge agrees to the trial, it will be the first time a criminal prosecution has been brought with a practice known as extraordinary rendition. The Spanish Prime Minister, José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero, has met in Senegal with the President Abdoulaye Wade about record levels of illegal immigration. The two men signed agreements on the management of controlled legal migration and an extension of border control. Spanish officials say more than 24,000 illegal immigrants have reached the Canary Islands off West Africa since the beginning of the year. Russia's chief prosecutor says Russian citizens will not be extradited to face trial in Britain if they're implicated in the poisoning of the former spy Alexander Litvinenko. British detectives in Moscow, as part of their investigation, have also been told to arrange all interviews through the Russian authorities. On Wednesday, Congo's first democratically elected president in 40 years will be sworn in with the hopes of a more stable future. But the BBC has disturbing evidence from Congo of military murders during the election campaign. A mass grave has been discovered in Ituri, in the east of the country. The BBC's East Africa correspondent Karen Allen went with the investigators on their gruesome search.
A funeral for a young woman in Geti Camp, eastern Congo. A country where 1,200 people are dying each day, disease and hunger taking their toll. But now, shocking revelations that despite the presence of UN peacekeepers, civilians who disappeared from this camp have been murdered in cold blood. Within the past 2 months, along this very road, men, women and children have been spotted being led away by soldiers from the Congolese army. Now, with the discovery of a mass grave, people's worst fears have been confirmed. These, the first pictures exposing an appalling crime. A mass grave with the bodies of men, women and children led to their death by Congo's new national army. These people, massacred by men meant to protect them. For this man, the emerging truth is very close to home. Out gathering firewood, his sister-in-law and 2 nieces, just 7 and 10, disappeared. it's almost certain they're among those killed by the army.
I just feel so angry. There are two types of soldiers. There are some good ones trying to protect us, but there are also some bad ones who just want to destroy us.
In this cell, soldiers being held for the crime, and from an army with former rebels in its ranks, promises that justice will be done.
We're not at all happy about this. For me personally, it's very disturbing. We're now waiting for the trial, and those who are guilty should be punished.
It's hard to hide Congo's bloody past. 4 million people killed in Africa's worst civil war. Years later, some victims still lie where they fell, clubbed to death by militiamen. For people like this man who lost 11 relatives in that troubled time, it's unforgivable that now the army are doing the same. Karen Allen, BBC News, Eastern Congo.
And still ahead in the programme, all systems go. The British grandmother's latest bid to set a round-the-world flying record despite her earlier near-death experience. Could stroke victims with brain damage be cured? A team of British scientists believes they can, and the BBC has learned they've applied to carry out human trials of a new treatment. But it involves taking cells from aborted fetuses.
These are frozen brain cells. They've been genetically engineered from an aborted fetus. Scientists here say they could hold the key to curing stroke.
We're very excited. The cells have been through a battery of tests. They've been through a series of animal safety testing studies, and they work. So now we feel we're ready to go into patient trials with a treatment for stroke.
Jim White had a stroke 9 years ago. He's one of 150,000 people that are hit by the condition each year. Some recover, but some, like Jim, are disabled for the rest of their lives.
It's affected right down my left side. Probably the arm now is affected probably by about 90%. Certain movements on the upper arm I can't do.
The drugs currently available relieve the symptoms, but there's no cure because parts of the brain are permanently damaged. But now this Guildford-based company think they found a way to regenerate brain cells. So how does the treatment work? The starting point is tissue taken from a 12-week aborted fetus. Scientists remove stem cells from the brain area. These are genetically modified so that they make copies of themselves when a chemical is added. So one fetus can produce as many cells as are needed. The idea is to inject these cells into the stroke patient's brain. So far they've been tried out on animals. What we have here is a slice of a damaged rat's brain. This red area should be much brighter, but the cells are simply not working. Now, after the fetal transplant, look what happens. This red area is much brighter. The cells are now working. And the hope is the same can happen in human patients. Anti-abortion groups, though, believe that even using one fetus for the treatment is unethical.
Even if you could say that it will bring great benefits to humanity, it has done a fundamental wrong to humanity by denying a fellow member of the human family's right to life.
If human trials are given the go-ahead, it could still take many years to establish whether the treatment is safe and effective. Prahlad Ghosh, BBC News.
The headlines on BBC News. The man chosen by President Bush to be his new Defence Secretary, Robert Gates, has told a Senate committee that the United States is not winning in Iraq. Fiji's ousted Prime Minister has left the country's capital following the military coup. The United States has suspended more than $2.5 million in assistance to the Pacific nation. And in Vietnam, at least 50 people have been killed after a tropical storm slammed its southern coast. More than 1,000 are dead or missing after it hit the Philippines earlier in the week. Well, we'll continue with that story from Vietnam, where 55 people are reported to have died and 26 are said to be missing after the severe tropical storm Durian hit the country. It destroyed houses and sank boats after previously wreaking havoc in the Philippines, where up to 1,200 people are dead or missing. Well, the BBC's Bill Hayton joins me now on the line from Hanoi. So, Bill, even though the government carried out these forced evacuations, this storm is still claiming casualties.
Yes, I mean, the storm is now moving away from Vietnam, but the cleanup is now beginning, and as more and more areas are reached by relief workers, I imagine that the death toll is probably going to rise further. So the authorities had two problems, really. One was that this part of Vietnam doesn't often get hit by big storms, and so people aren't quite so prepared. And the other is that the storm changed direction. It didn't go across the country as was expected, but followed the southern coast. And so it hit areas that didn't think they were going to be hit, and so the preparations there weren't quite so good. So despite those forcible evacuations, it does seem that at least 50 people have been killed. Has there been an assessment of how much the repair work is going to cost and how long it's going to take? Not yet. I think it's still a bit too early, but I mean, this is the 9th typhoon or tropical storm to hit Vietnam this year. So the country is well used to dealing with it, but it's hit a part of the country that isn't so used to clearing up. I mean, a lot of the damage will be hard to repair. But, for example, I mean, the thousands of houses that have been literally blown over or had their roofs torn off, and the people who live in those houses don't have huge amounts of money, so they're not going to have the resources to repair them immediately. But the government in previous storms after previous storms has tried to step in with cash to help people, and I mean, Vietnam is very organised at that level. It's just a question of whether we'll have the money to rebuild the infrastructure. Bill, thanks very much indeed. That was Bill Hayton on the line there from Hanoi. Now, the failure to prevent the 9/11 attacks in America is still forcing major changes in the way special agencies work. One of the most significant developments is the creation of a single centre to analyse all intelligence material, foreign and domestic. Our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, was given very rare access to this new centre in Washington.
In a Washington suburb, I'm on a journey. No address, no postcode, just the phone number of a man known only as T. After months of requests, he's granted us permission to visit one of America's newest and most secret establishments.
Hello. This is where we maintain a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week operational watch in the counterterrorism intelligence community and monitor situational awareness in the world of counterterrorism.
Because we're media, the undercover agents from the FBI and CIA, who'd normally sit at these desks, have been moved next door, away from our cameras. So what are we seeing up on the screen here?
Right now you're looking at the Eastern Seaboard Air Corridor, and we use that to monitor events of special interest and to keep an eye should there be any reports of what we call no-fly activity.
A no-fly means a plane with a passenger suspicious enough that the flight can even get turned back. In everyone's minds is the thought, 9/11, never again. When this center was set up 2 years ago, they brought in the Imagineers from Hollywood, experts on sharing information. The data flow here is enormous, over 6,000 reports coming through each day, from satellite, electronic and human intelligence sources. When an incident happens, a terror line is created to pass the information to everyone who needs it. This is the nerve center of the US-led global war on terrorism. It's here in this room, 3 times a day, every day, that America's specialists in counterterrorism intelligence gather to exchange information. It brings in 16 agencies plus the White House, the FBI, the CIA, Homeland Security. It's been described as a stock exchange for counterterrorism intelligence. The man in charge is almost unknown, yet he has one of the most sensitive jobs in the world. Admiral Red gives the President America's war plan on fighting terrorism. So what is that plan?
Obviously you want to stop an attack, but you don't want to stop attack just in the nick of time. You want to go back, so you sort of work your way back, ultimately all the way back to the radicalization, recruitment phase, if you will, proselytization phase, all the way through things like travel, the finances which underpin it, training, leadership, planning, typically more travel, and then everything up to and including stopping the attack.
The NCTC has 400,000 suspect names in its database. It's got 5 teams working 12-hour shifts and an electronic library with over 6 million pieces of information. But of course none of this is guaranteed to stop terrorism. Senior officials told us this war could last 40 more years and there will be defeats along the way. Frank Gardner, BBC News, Washington.
Dozens of people have been injured in riots in Paraguay after 3 men were acquitted of murder for their role in a supermarket fire in 2004, in which at least 400 people died. The men were accused of locking the doors when the fire broke out. The rioting began in the courtroom, where survivors and relatives of the dead rushed towards the judges, overturning tables and chairs to protest against the verdict. The rioters then spilled out onto the streets of Asuncion, targeting the headquarters of the supermarket chain. Doctors treating the former military ruler Augusto Pinochet say he's over the worst after treatment following a heart attack. However, his condition remains serious. General Pinochet, who ruled Chile for 17 years, is currently facing a series of charges over human rights abuses and tax evasion allegedly committed during his time in office. The BBC's Steve Kingston is in Santiago.
Well, here in the Chilean capital, Santiago, a small but dedicated band of Augusto Pinochet supporters are demonstrating their loyalty to this country's former military ruler. And they've had some good news from the military hospital here. Remember, he was rushed to hospital in the early hours of Sunday morning after a heart attack. He was read the last rites. Doctors operated to clear an artery. But those same doctors are now saying that General Pinochet is sitting up in bed, he's conscious, he's talking to visitors. And the period of 48 critical hours after the heart attack has now ended. So they say that he is on the mend. You can see, though, still that the media is camped out here waiting for news, talking to visitors. And there is some speculation developing in the Chilean media about the seriousness of the general's condition. Some people within the human rights community saying this is a man who has used his health in the past to avoid conviction or trial in a court on human rights and corruption charges. The 91-year-old general's family say, no, this is a very old, sick man. His condition is still extremely serious. But they do hope now, given what the doctors are saying, that he may be able to go home within the next 10 days.
Steve Kingston there reporting from Santiago. A 66-year-old grandmother from Britain has begun her latest attempt to set a new world record by flying round the world. Jennifer Murray and her co-pilot, Colin Bodil, will travel via the North and South Poles in a helicopter. Their last attempt ended when they crashed during a blizzard in Antarctica.
Magellan, Columbus, Shackleton. Great explorers, great adventurers. Well, now you can add Jennifer Murray to the list. A pensioner, a grandmother, and soon a possible record breaker.
I heard that no woman had flown around the world and that it had only been done by 4 men. I thought, hey, here's one. And then, of course, once you start on these adventures, it just gets you, it gets into your blood. You just want to go for it each time.
Although the last time they went for it, they nearly died, crashing in Antarctica, waiting 2 days in snow and ice to be rescued. Bones were broken, pride was damaged, but now another attempt.
This has been a dream to actually get back in the helicopter and finish off what we set out to do, because after that crash in Antarctica back in 2003, there's been a lasting sadness. There's been a sort of trauma about it, sadness for the loss of the helicopter. Now we're going to put all that right.
And despite the dangers, she has her husband's complete support.
Behind that glamour, there's a steely determination to do these things. I think it's great to see women, 66-year-old grandmothers, charging around the world in helicopters. I think it's fantastic.
After the goodbyes, a final check, and they were off. And in around 6 months' time, after they visited 34 countries, travelled nearly 60,000 kilometres, with a little luck, they'll be back. Tim Allman, BBC News.
Fingers crossed. And a reminder of our main news. The man nominated to be the next American Defence Secretary, Robert Gates, has conceded that the United States is not winning in Iraq. This is BBC News. Thanks for watching.
Hello again. We've seen a lot of persistent rain across Wales over the last few hours, and more expected during the course of Wednesday. This means the Met Office have issued a severe weather warning out. More rain adding to already high river levels, not helping the situation across parts of Wales. So it's going to be a cloudy old start to the day with that rain sitting there through much of the morning. Come a little bit further north though for Northern Ireland and also western parts of Scotland. The weather cheers up. We should see some bright skies and some sunny spells as well, although I think we will see some showers here later on in the afternoon. A chilly start for the northeast of Scotland, a touch of frost, even some icy patches on the roads and pavements first thing, something to be aware of. Through the Midlands and across to East Anglia, it'll be a fairly grey and cloudy start to the day here, and there will be further showers, I think, during the course of Wednesday, and certainly more showers to come across the southwest. Here the showers will be accompanied by quite a strong and blustery westerly wind. Now, through the rest of the morning, most parts of the UK will tend to brighten up, and many parts will see some sunny spells, but notice across parts of Wales, through towards the Midlands and East Anglia, well, we keep fairly cloudy skies here, and underneath that cloudy strip of weather, we'll also see some further showers, and some of those showers could be fairly lengthy at times too. For Scotland in the afternoon, we'll still have a few showers as well coming into the western side of Scotland, but for eastern areas, we should be sheltered from the wind, and here we'll see good spells of sunshine. It will be quite chilly with a strong westerly wind and temperatures of just 7 degrees. Should be brightening up as well through northern England, but again through the Midlands and East Anglia, fairly cloudy afternoon, and there will be further showers on and off through the course of the day. For the far south of England and also the southern half of Wales as well, we should see the weather brightening up, fewer showers, more in the way of dry and sunny conditions, and temperatures peaking at around 11 degrees Celsius, which is 52 degrees in Fahrenheit. But I think Northern Ireland, the weather will go downhill here, and we will see 1 or 2 showers dotted around. Now, into Thursday, we will see a very windy spell of weather as an area of low pressure spirals in off the Atlantic, bringing some very, very strong winds indeed. Gusts up to around 60 or 70 miles an hour, potentially damaging gusts of wind. Cloud and rain clears away from the east coast, and we'll see blustery, squally showers packing in soon, behind with a mixture of sunshine and showers for the rest of Thursday. Friday remains pretty windy as well, and it's going to stay unsettled. We'll see a mixture once again of sunshine and heavy blustery showers, those temperatures peaking at around 10 or 11 degrees Celsius. As for the start of the weekend, well, we'll see fewer showers, more places will stay dry, and we'll see some decent spells of sunshine, but those temperatures will be a few degrees below what we've been used to over the last few days.
4:37, I'm just rehearsing the boys. Religious architecture.
Here's Morrison on Radio 1 at Scott Mills at 4:37. Good afternoon, Bill. Ladies and gentlemen. Right, here we go. He's a miserable git. Instantly. Mr. Stephen. BBC Radio 4. 10 seconds, okay. M25,
So get everybody in position, please.
Wait. Quiet for line, right?
My parents will this.
Give it tight. Take one. BBC National Orchestra of Wales.
The Community Secretary.
We're passing the book too much.
Connie whispered to her. Nice and quiet then.
It's 4:37 and I'm chained to a radiator.
I try to save our environment by not dropping litter.
Hello, my name is Mary, and I'm from Brazil.
The world through the eyes of the next generation, young people across the globe speak out. Generation Next, all this week on BBC News 24.
Get the headlines every 15 minutes here on BBC News 24.
BBC News headlines, I'm Martine Croxall. The man chosen by President Bush to succeed Donald Rumsfeld as his defence secretary has said America is losing the war in Iraq. Robert Gates told a Senate committee that the status quo was unacceptable and he was ready to consider all options for change. The committee unanimously approved Mr. Gates' nomination. It now has to be considered by the full Senate. The Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, Don McKinnon, says Fiji may be suspended from the organisation. He's described the overthrow of the government by armed forces as a violation of democratic principles. 55 people are reported to have died and 26 missing when the severe tropical storm Dorian hit Vietnam. It destroyed houses and sank boats after previously wreaking havoc in the Philippines, where up to 1,200 people are dead or still missing. chief prosecutor says Russian citizens will not be extradited to face trial in Britain if they're implicated in the poisoning of the former spy Alexander Litvinenko. Russian officials also said that British detectives investigating the case in Moscow will also have to arrange all interviews through the Russian authorities. A Royal Marine has been killed and a second injured in a battle with Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. A spokeswoman for the Ministry of Defence said British forces were engaged in fighting in southern Helmand. Anne Clwyd has been replaced by Tony Lloyd as chairman of the Parliamentary Labour Party. It's thought she was forced out because of her support for the Iraq War. NASA, the American Space Agency, says it plans to build a permanent base on the moon. 14 of the world's space agencies are involved, and if all goes according to plan, manned missions could begin in 2020. Time for the sports news now with Sean Fletcher.
Hello, all the Champions League news in a moment, but first the Ashes, and what now for the England cricket team? That's a question that's sure to be asked plenty of times over the next week and a half during the build-up to the third test against Australia in Perth. It's after a huge batting collapse on the final day of the second test led to an incredible defeat for the tourists in Adelaide. The match was heading for a draw, but England slumped to 129 all out in their second innings. Australia took to the field after tea, only needing 168, and had 36 overs in which to get those runs. The Aussies now have a 2-0 lead in the series and only need to win one of the next 3 matches to regain the Ashes.
Back-to-back test matches are hard, both mentally and physically, and that gives us just over a week to regroup, get our minds right, and more importantly get our bodies right. You know, we can recover going into the next test match in Perth.
Okay, I have to ask you finally, you need to win 2 of the last 3. How confident are you that you can do that to retain the Ashes?
We've got to be. We got better and better throughout this trip. From the Gabba, we played a lot of good cricket here. It's just a case of seizing moments in the game, and this time Australia seized the moment, which turned a test match in the end, and we've got to learn from that. But we've got to come back stronger as we did at the Gabba. We've got to come back again at Perth.
No doubt that we're a long way behind after day 2, but we spoke about lots of different things the last 3 days, and I've said and the coaches said that we all thought we were a chance of winning the test match still. A lot of hard work that we had to do to achieve that, but we've dug in, we've done the hard work, and we've ended up winning the game, and it's one of the all-time great test wins as far as I'm concerned.
Now, Chelsea have finished top of their Champions League group after beating Levski Sofia at Stamford Bridge. Andrei Shevchenko scored his first ever European goal for the Blues in their 2-0 win over the Bulgarian side. There was also a first for substitute Sean Wright-Phillips. He scored his first ever goal for Chelsea. Jose Mourinho said afterwards the match was more like a friendly than a Champions League game. The defending champions Barcelona finished second in Group A behind Chelsea after beating Werder Bremen 2-0. Those two sides progressed to the knockout stages. Robbie Fowler scored 2 goals for Liverpool, his first ever in the Champions League, but it wasn't enough to stop them losing 3-2 against Galatasaray in Istanbul. Liverpool still finished top of Group C, though, with 13 points. Meanwhile, there have been 2 games in the Premiership. At White Hart Lane, Spurs took the lead against Middlesbrough through a wonderful strike from in-form striker Dimitar Berbatov. That goal coming 3 minutes after half-time. But Borough looked like they'd stolen the point with 10 minutes remaining. A real goal-mouth scramble, ending with centre-half Robert Huth lashing the ball past Paul Robinson. But struggling Borough were made to pay for not being alive to the quick thinking of Robbie Keane, who scored 4 minutes later. And Talal El Kakuri scored in the last minute to give Charlton a dramatic 1-0 win over Blackburn at the Valley. It's the Addicts' first win under new manager Les Reed, and it takes them off the bottom of the table. Right, that's all for me for now. More sport later.
There's more, of course, on our interactive service, BBC Eye, on Freeview or digital satellite. Just press the red button on your handset. That's the summary. I'll be back in 10 minutes with the latest headlines. Now BBC News 24, ABC's World News.
Welcome to World News. Tonight, frank talk from the future Secretary of Defense, who says the U.S. is not winning in Iraq, and that U.S. troops will be needed there for a long time. After childbirth, the largest study ever on the mental health of new mothers. They face greater danger than anyone realized. To the rescue, new developments in the search for a father who braved the wilderness to save his family. How his wife kept their children alive. And having a blast. The women's movement reviving an American sport and discovering the thrill of the hunt.
From ABC News headquarters, this is World News with Charles Gibson.
Good evening. A confirmation hearing on Capitol Hill is, in essence, a job interview with TV cameras. Robert Gates, who will replace Donald Rumsfeld as Defense Secretary, had his hearing today. He told the senators the U.S. is not winning the war in Iraq. And he talked in rather blunt terms about the mistakes he feels the administration has made. He's going to get the job. The Senate Armed Services Committee voted unanimously in his favor, to some extent as a reward for his candor today. Our national security correspondent, Jonathan Karl, was at the hearing.
The question was direct, and so was the answer.
Do you believe that we are currently winning in Iraq?
No, sir. A few minutes later,
we are not winning the war in Iraq, is that correct?
That is my view, yes, sir.
And therefore the status quo is not acceptable.
That is correct, sir. After a short break, Gates sought to clarify. I certainly stand by my statement this morning that we are not winning, but we are not losing. But I want to make clear that pertains to the situation in Iraq as a whole. Our military forces win the battles that they fight. But all day long, Gates strayed from the White House script, even on the biggest question of all.
With that benefit of hindsight, would you say that invading Iraq was the right decision or the wrong decision?
I think it's too soon to tell. Gates identified several mistakes he believes have been made, disbanding the Iraqi army, underestimating the job of rebuilding the country, and not sending enough troops. I suspect in hindsight some of the folks in the administration probably would not make the same decisions that they made, and I think one of those is that there clearly were insufficient troops in Iraq after the initial invasion to establish control over the country. Several senators praised Gates and took shots at his boss.
Now, in short, should we believe you or the president on the critical issue whether the administration is really willing to make a change in its policy?
If I'm confirmed, I'll be independent. I intend to draw my own conclusions and I'll make my recommendations. But I can assure you that I don't owe anybody anything. Middle one! U.S. troops will remain in Iraq for a long time, he said, but there may be far fewer of them. The pressures of the hearing are nothing compared to the pressures I got from a woman who came over to me at the hotel while I was having dinner the other night. And she said, I have 2 sons in Iraq. For God's sake, bring them home safe. When asked about Syria and Iran, Gates sounded eager to avoid another war. I think that military action against Iran would be an absolute last resort. We have seen in Iraq that once war is unleashed, it becomes unpredictable. And I think that the consequences of a conflict, a military conflict with Iran, could be quite dramatic.
On Iraq, Gates said that all options are on the table, but he mostly dodged questions when asked what specifically he would do differently. He said he first plans to travel to Iraq, meet with the military commanders, and Charlie, read that all-important Iraq study group recommendations, which will be released tomorrow.
Jonathan Karl reporting from Washington tonight. We're also bringing in our chief Washington correspondent, George Stephanopoulos. And George, let me start where John just finished, because Gates did not say what he would do or what he thinks the administration ought to do now in Iraq.
In fact, he said, Charlie, there are no new ideas on Iraq. The question is, how do you put together what's out there in a new way that provides a path forward? That Iraq study group is going to be key in that process. And I think Gates's reaction is very much like how Republicans and Democrats are going to react to the Iraq study group. They're not going to treat it as a complete answer. They're not going to embrace it whole. They're going to treat it more like a Chinese menu, picking out what they like, ignoring what they don't like.
But it is obvious Gates went over very well.
No question. In the words of one Senate aide, he was the anti-Rumsfeld. He was direct. He was deferential. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. That's why he's going to sail through.
Now, you did mention that the Baker-Hamilton report comes tomorrow. The ISG report, as it's called, the Iraq Study Group. There are other reports to come on things that might be done in Iraq. So what do the President and Gates do with them?
Well, the President has 2 more reports coming out. He's asked his National Security Advisor to do a review. He's asked the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to do a review. But what the White House is pointing towards is for the President to come before the country with his recommendation for a new strategy by Christmas.
George Stephanopoulos, thanks. As the search goes on for a new way forward in Iraq, some say the violence there already is spinning out of control. More than 36 civilians were killed in Baghdad alone today. It is often impossible to get the full story behind some of the bombings and massacres ravaging Iraq, but tonight we do have details on one case of mass murder there in a small town east of Baghdad. ABC's Dan Harris is in Baghdad.
28 Shiites shot and left for dead in a village north of Baghdad. Under normal circumstances, this slaughter might not have drawn more notice than this brief military press release, saying the incident is currently under investigation. Just another addition to the daily catalog of sectarian savagery. But one man, a 30-year-old farmer and father of 4 named Akil Hashim Jadoo, says he survived this mass murder. He brought about a dozen family members, the army, and a video camera back to document what happened. Jadoo says members of a Sunni tribe kidnapped, bound, and blindfolded him and the other men and took them to this marsh. They started shooting, he says, and I started praying. Then, Jadoo says, the killers shot each man in the head, one by one. But since my blindfold was stained with blood, he says, they thought I was dead. Before the killers left, Jadoo says one of them hesitated, saying, I want to make sure they are dead. These Shiites take a long time to die. The leaders of Jadoo's tribe, who are followers of the radical Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, told ABC News the killers are Sunni tribesmen trying to scare Shiites out of a mixed area. But they say they are not optimistic and may have to take matters into their own hands, implying that they will perhaps respond with violence of their own. It's just one incident, but it's indicative of a dangerous dynamic that many here believe has taken hold, an unstoppable spiral of religion-fueled revenge. Dan Harris, ABC News, Baghdad.
There are significant developments to report tonight in the poisoning death of former Russian spy Alexander Litvinenko. A British official tells ABC News that British detectives have identified a prime suspect, a man who also once was a Russian spy. But now the British detectives are finding they will not get cooperation from Russia. ABC senior foreign correspondent Jim Shuto is again tonight in London.
British detectives had just arrived in Moscow when Russian officials said they would not let them see the man they consider their prime suspect, former Russian spy Andrei Lugovoy. He was unavailable, Russian officials said, hospitalized with signs of radiation poisoning. In fact, Russia's top prosecutor said the British could not speak with any witnesses on their own and could not extradite them to Britain if they're charged. We will be asking the questions, he said, not Scotland Yard. Tonight, a senior British official tells ABC News the Russian government is obstructing the investigation, even as more and more signs point to Russia and Lugovoy. ABC News has reconstructed Lugovoy's movements and found a trail of deadly polonium-210 from Moscow to London, right up to the day he met Litvinenko at this London hotel. October 25th, 1 week before Litvinenko was poisoned, Lugovoy flies to London. Both his plane and his hotel, the Sheraton, test positive for radiation. October 31st, 1 day before the poisoning, Lugovoy returns to London. Again, his plane, his hotel, now the Millennium, and a soccer stadium he visits all test positive. And today, word that Lugovoy himself may be contaminated. Before he was hospitalized, Lugovoy promised to cooperate in the investigation. I have to, he said, to avoid any speculation. There is more than speculation linking Lugovoy to the case, but tonight there is still no sign Russia will let him speak to British investigators anytime soon. Jim Shuto, ABC News, London.
And some news tonight from NASA, going public with a bold plan to return to the moon and eventually have astronauts stay there for 6 months at a stretch. NASA plans to set up a lunar polar base camp, with the first crew landing in the year 2020 and the permanent outpost finished 4 years later. No word on what the price tag might be. Still ahead on this broadcast, some surprising research on risks faced by new mothers. They are at greater risk than previously thought, and that'll be our closer look. Late developments in the search for the father lost in the wilderness, how he risked his life to save his wife and children. And look who's calling the shots. The sport, not just for men anymore, women reviving an American pastime.
This is BBC News 24. Let's take a look at the headlines. The man chosen by President Bush to be his new defense secretary, Robert Gates, has told a Senate committee that the United States is not winning in Iraq. Fiji's ousted Prime Minister has left the country's capital following the military coup. The United States has suspended more than $2.5 million in assistance to the Pacific nation. In Vietnam, at least 50 people have been killed after a tropical storm slammed its southern coast. More than 1,000 are dead or missing after it hit the Philippines earlier in the week. More from me at 2, but now we return to ABC's World News.
We are going to take a closer look tonight at perhaps the most serious risk faced by new mothers, postpartum depression. A study released today, the largest of its kind ever done, confirms as many as 15% of new moms suffer from postpartum depression and lose the joys of what should be one of the happiest times in life. Here's ABC's John McKenzie.
Oh, she's beautiful.
Congratulations. The birth of a child, a wondrous, joyous event.
Childbirth is a potent inducer of psychiatric episodes in women.
This study followed more than 630,000 first-time mothers, none of whom had any history of psychiatric problems. Researchers found the most dangerous time for a new mother was much earlier than ever imagined, and the risks much higher. Just 10 to 19 days after giving birth, women were 7 times more likely than other women to suffer a severe mental illness. Not only depression, but bipolar disorder, even schizophrenia.
I did nothing but cry. I didn't want to be with my son. I just pretty much went through the paces.
For Lisa Chalice, depression hit days after she gave birth to her son Dax.
It was an awful feeling, and it just kind of took over my life.
Doctors say new mothers are more prone to psychiatric illness, even requiring hospitalization, because they're not only going through massive hormonal changes.
There's also a lot of just physiologic things going on with the way their heart works and their lungs work and their appetite. They also typically are very sleep deprived.
For many women, their illness goes undiagnosed.
Women don't want to go into an obstetrician and say, yeah, I have this beautiful new baby, thank you, but I don't feel like myself and I'm really depressed, and burst into tears.
If untreated, postpartum depression can last months, even years, and disrupt the entire family. John McKenzie, ABC News, New York.
And joining me now is ABC medical editor Dr. Tim Johnson. So, we know that a mother who just gave birth is 7 times more likely to suffer depression than other women. So as a doctor, once you know that, what do you know?
Well, I think this study, Charlie, argues for competent and mandatory mental health screening on all new mothers somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd week after delivery. These problems are still too often misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all because, as pointed out, the mother doesn't want to complain. And even when she does, the family and doctors don't take it seriously. They tend to say to her, well, this is normal, just grin and bear it. We have to have competent screening that finds these problems and therefore allows us to treat them early.
And if you find the problem, you treat it with antidepressants?
Antidepressant, if the problem is depression, other medications if the problem is bipolar or psychosis. But there are medications for all of these conditions, and the sooner you give them, the shorter the period of suffering for the mother and less interruption for the family.
And there's time before antidepressants take effect. In that period of time, do you worry about the health of the baby or the welfare of the mom?
Yes, you do. And if the problem is really serious, you may have to hospitalize to prevent any problems from developing until the medications kick in.
All right, but it does certainly call attention to the
Absolutely.
problem. Dr. Tim Johnson, thanks. The search continues in Oregon for a San Francisco man missing for 10 days in the wilderness. James Kim and his family disappeared while returning from a Thanksgiving road trip to the Northwest. His wife and 2 daughters were found alive late yesterday in their car. ABC's Neil Karlinski is in Grants Pass, Oregon, tonight.
By air, using heat-seeking sensors, and on foot, search and rescue teams are in a race against time to find 35-year-old James Kim.
We were able to find his footprints up the roadway, and then they went into that drainage, and that's what we're working today.
In that area, police now say they found a pair of jeans matching those worn by Kim. A day earlier, rescue teams found the family's lost Saab station wagon tucked into a rural back road. After 9 days trapped inside in freezing weather, Katie Kim, her 4-year-old daughter Penelope, and 7-month-old daughter Sabine were rescued alive and in remarkably good shape.
She seemed in good spirits. She was smiling and waving when she came in the ambulance.
The family survived inside their car. When the gas ran out, they burned the car's tires. Huddled together inside, the family shared baby food. James Kim picked wild berries and melted snow for water. Katie is credited with keeping her daughters alive by breastfeeding them.
She was so happy, I think, that her children were okay, and said, "Mama, I nursed both babies."
There was no cell service in the area, but the nearest cell tower did pick up a faint signal from the family's phone. Search teams used the signal to narrow their search. But James Kim had hiked out 2 days earlier to look for help.
Surviving in these mountains this time of year isn't easy, even with the best of equipment. James Kim hiked off in his tennis shoes, wearing nothing but jeans and a jacket.
The family's trouble began when they turned onto a little-used road in the forest. With snow falling, the windy road soon became too hard to drive. The family tried to turn around, but got stuck. This afternoon, Katie Kim and her daughters were released from the hospital.
Their sole focus right now is on waiting for news from James. And that's really where they're at this morning.
Trackers believe they're close, but in this vast, rugged terrain, finding James Kim will not be easy. Neil Karlinski, ABC News, Grants Pass, Oregon.
And the second time was the charm today in the elaborate, expensive effort to move the massive mothballed aircraft carrier, the USS Intrepid. After a failed attempt last month, the 900-foot-long ship turned museum was finally freed from the deep mud of the Hudson River here in New York. It took a lot of dredging and 6 powerful tugboats to get her away from her dock. She now gets a $60 million overhaul in New Jersey. Finally tonight, Annie has got her gun. And so do Martha and Sue and Janet and a lot of other women who are the new face of hunting. Women are discovering what they say is the thrill of the kill, just as the world of hunting is looking for some new blood. Here's ABC's Bill Redeker.
Pull. In Colorado, the hunt is on for hunters.
Ready for another one?
The state is trying to reverse a decade of decline by recruiting and training the next generation, sponsoring weekend hunts like this one at a pheasant preserve.
So it's no longer dad puts on his gear and goes hunting, leaves mom and the kids at home. It's now a family event that everybody goes hunting.
While programs such as this one are designed to ensure that hunters won't become an endangered species, young people are not the only ones being recruited. Women are also being called to arms. Woohoo! And it's paid off. The number of women hunters has soared 72% in the last 5 years. Women such as Kristen Burns are the reason why.
Women are now starting to become more independent and are starting to try things that men are doing and are actually learning that they enjoy it.
Women of all ages. Ella Tate is 15 years old.
The adrenaline rush is pretty nice when you get out there and there's this bird pops up and you like to hit it.
Instructors say women prefer to hunt with other women. Call it bonding in the bird field. And they say they pick up the sport quickly.
Women tend to be a little bit easier to teach. There's not that need to show the bravado that men have. And we've had great success with teaching some of these women to be wonderful shots.
Case in point, Julie Swayze, who bags a bird on her first day out.
When you pull that trigger, there's nothing better.
Nothing?
It's way better than going to the mall.
Speaking of which, outfitters are now catering to women, marketing women's camouflage, shorter gun stocks and barrels, less powerful ammunition with a gentler kick.
Anything that has to do with the outdoors in Colorado, it seems like more and more women are participating.
Let it clear good.
Encouraging news for hunting states which depend on the $21 billion a year sport to fund wildlife conservation programs. Bill Redeker, ABC News, Meade, Colorado.
Bonding in the bird field. That is World News for this Tuesday. I'm Charlie Gibson. I'll be reporting from Washington tomorrow, speaking with James Baker and Lee Hamilton, the co-chairman of the Iraq Study Group, which makes its report public for the first time tomorrow. I hope you had a good day. For all of us at ABC News, have a good night.
Hello again. We've seen a lot of persistent rain across Wales over the last few hours and more expected during the course of Wednesday. This means the Met Office have issued a severe weather warning out. More rain adding to already high river levels, not helping the situation across parts of Wales. So it's going to be a cloudy old start to the day with that rain sitting there through much of the morning. Come a little bit further north though for Northern Ireland and also western parts of Scotland. The weather cheers up. We should see some bright skies and some sunny spells as well, although I think we will see some showers here later on in the afternoon. A chilly start for the northeast of Scotland, a touch of frost, even some icy patches on the roads and pavements first thing, something to be aware of. Through the Midlands and across to East Anglia, it'll be a fairly grey and cloudy start to the day here, and there will be further showers, I think, during the course of Wednesday, and certainly more showers to come across the southwest. Here the showers will be accompanied by quite a strong and blustery westerly wind. Now, through the rest of the morning, most parts of the UK will tend to brighten up and many parts will see some sunny spells. But notice across parts of Wales, through towards the Midlands and East Anglia, well, we keep fairly cloudy skies here, and underneath that cloudy strip of weather, we'll also see some further showers, and some of those showers could be fairly lengthy at times too. For Scotland in the afternoon, we'll still have a few showers as well coming into the western side of Scotland, but for eastern areas, we should be sheltered from the wind, and here we'll see good spells of sunshine. It will be quite chilly with a strong westerly wind and temperatures of just 7 degrees. Should be brightening up as well through northern England, but again through the Midlands and East Anglia, fairly cloudy afternoon, and there will be further showers on and off through the course of the day. For the far south of England and also the southern half of Wales as well, we should see the weather brightening up, fewer showers, more in the way of dry and sunny conditions, and temperatures peaking at around 11 degrees Celsius, which is 52 degrees in Fahrenheit. But I think Northern Ireland, the weather will go downhill here, and we will see 1 or 2 showers dotted around. Now, into Thursday, we will see a very windy spell of weather as an area of low pressure spirals in off the Atlantic, bringing some very, very strong winds indeed. Gusts up to around 60 or 70 miles an hour, potentially damaging gusts of wind. Cloud and rain clears away from the east coast, and we'll see blustery, squally showers packing in soon behind, with a mixture of sunshine and showers for the rest of Thursday. Friday remains pretty windy as well, and it's going to stay unsettled. We'll see a mixture once again of sunshine and heavy blustery showers, those temperatures peaking at around 10 or 11 degrees Celsius. As for the start of the weekend, well, we'll see fewer showers, more places will stay dry, and we'll see some decent spells of sunshine, but those temperatures will be a few degrees below what we've been used to over the last few days.
Wherever you go, you can take BBC News with you. Just text news to 81010 to access the latest stories from the BBC News website on your mobile phone, or go to bbc.co.uk/news. BBC News, whenever you need to know.
Earth, it can bury the dead. Anybody who does herbing has had a friend who's died. Or it can create new life.
This project is about producing good food.
It all depends.
Been in jail, Screws can't even tell us what to eat.
What you put into it.
Things are going to get hard.
I feel desperately out of my depth.
But if you want it that much, you'll get there.
Monty Don helps a group of heroin addicts bury their addiction. Monty Don, Growing Out of Trouble, starts Thursday at 9 on BBC2. The BBC is the only British broadcaster to have news correspondents permanently based in Islamabad, Baghdad, Gaza, Kabul, Jakarta, Shanghai, Paris, Cairo, Rome, Seoul, Sydney, the UN and Tehran, which means when a story breaks, we're already there.
It's obviously a very difficult time for
BBC News, whenever you need to know.